Hello, I'm Michael Parker, and welcome to Antidote. For months, Southern California had prepared for the onslaught of El Nino. What we had not prepared for was a gigantic man-made volcano of methane now erupting in Porter Ranch, California, about 15 miles north of here. Joining us today to discuss this is Tim O'Connor. He is the director of the Oil and Gas Program for California for the EDF, which is the Environmental Defense Fund. Tim, welcome to Antidote.
Hello, Michael.
Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
When I first heard about this, there were comparisons to the Deepwater Horizon catastrophe. And it was being described as, probably second to that as the biggest environmental disaster in North America. And at first, I'll be honest, I was skeptical that it was of that magnitude, but apparently it is. Explain to us just how bad this thing is.
Well, I think that the Aliso Canyon gas leak really, which is beyond what anybody expected was possible, from a facility like this. I mean, this is the 5th largest natural gas storage facility in the United States, the largest in the western United States. We're talking about a leak that is putting out as much climate pollution at its peak as 7.5 million cars put out every single day. Or when you think about it in terms of other terms, that's like putting all the refineries in California side by side up on top of the hill there, right in Porter Ranch, and letting them run. And that's how much this was putting out every single day. They've been able to bring some of the emissions down. They've been pumping out gas from the facility and have brought down those emissions by about 40%. And so even after cutting it by 40%, this single emission is putting out more climate pollution every single day than all of the other oil and gas sources in the state combined.
You have a counter on your website, and it shows a real-time impact of the leaky methane. And right now we're looking at about 78,000 metric tons. I mean, that's hard to even comprehend. And the other thing that I think one of the things that would surprise a lot of people who are not in the oil or gas industry, when they picture natural gas, most people would take it for granted. It comes into your home, you cook with it, heats your house, whatever. And they probably think that natural gas is stored in perhaps large propane tanks, are probably what they're picturing. So the news that we actually store natural gas underground was probably a new thing for people. So talk about this particular field and the capacity of this field and how much natural gas is down there right now.
Well, you think about Los Angeles and Southern California. We have in the summer months really nice weather. It gets very hot. In fact, a lot of people aren't going to be running their heaters and things of that nature. But as it gets to the winter months and things get colder, people have to use their furnaces more. Similarly, we have more renewable energy on the grid, and we need to balance that energy. In a lot of ways, we do it through natural gas. And we fire peaking power plants to make up for peak electric demand. So this one facility balances the electric and gas system throughout Southern California and can provide the natural gas demands for many, many months, just this facility alone. We're talking about 80 billion standard cubic feet of gas that are stored really under a mountain, 8,000 feet deep. And so when people think about, it's a natural gas storage field, no, it's a mountain of natural gas, and it's stored under pressures upwards of 3,000 pounds per square inch. And so now we're looking at gas that is pressured so high it turns into liquid, and so they can store it in vast quantities underground. And it's leaking out to the tune of 1 billion standard cubic feet roughly every 2 weeks. And so we think that by the end of this event, we're going to see roughly 10 million metric tons worth of carbon dioxide equivalent coming out of this single leak. Methane itself is a very potent greenhouse gas, 84 times that of carbon dioxide. And so we're looking at methane, which is a valuable resource that is being wasted into the atmosphere. Upwards of $12 million of gas already have left this facility, and a huge climate problem because of the vast gas that's escaping.
When methane goes into the atmosphere, how long does it take to break down? Because I've heard that it just circulates for years and years. And how does it break down?
Well, methane is what's known as a short-lived climate pollutant. It doesn't last in the atmosphere as long as, say, carbon dioxide, but when it's there, it has a much higher climate impact. And so over time, methane in the atmosphere breaks down through natural processes. But when it's up there, it's circulating, it's trapping heat and preventing heat from the Earth that it would otherwise radiate back into space, prevents that from escaping and heats the atmosphere directly.
Let's talk about the well itself, because it appears this well, this SS-25, and this field was originally an oil field, and I guess they've depleted that, so now they're pumping the gas in there for storage. This well, SS-25, it was originally drilled in the 50s, and then they started using it in the 70s for storage?
Yeah, that's right. A lot of fields in the United States that store natural gas are actually of this type. Upwards of 75% of the natural gas storage that we do in the U.S. comes from old oil and gas fields, old depleted fields. And they make pretty good storage basins because the gas and the oil that was in there before we drilled wells into them, that's where it collected and that's where it's stored for millions and millions of years. And so now we have wells that are drilled into these old catchments where oil and gas collected, and we pump the gas down in there and we keep it until we need it later. And so when we think about, where is this in California and how does this relate to the rest of the U.S., it's one of about 400 facilities in the United States and about one of 14 in California that store this kind of gas.
And when we're storing this gas, it's not just one single big hole in the ground, it's multiple strata. Is this right?
Yeah, I mean, think of it more like a sponge.
Okay.
You don't have any one hole that goes into a tank. You sort of fill the sponge up with water and it kind of saturates the sponge. And that's what happens underground. Now, this facility, it's really been documented well by the California Council on Science and Technology that this facility has over time fracked the rock that's underground, and we believe has probably been able to kind of make the entire geology below the cap rock all sort of geologically interactive. And so there's about 115 separate wells up on the mountain, and they're all kind of connected underground because they all go into the same sponge.
So what you're saying is this sponge now, before it just had little holes in it, now the holes are interconnected?
Yeah, that's right.
Somewhat?
And when you think about the interconnection, I mean, a sponge itself is sort of interconnected.
Certainly.
There's a lot of pore spaces. And so we know that they measure pressure across the field. And we expect to see, once all this is said and done, pressure drops occurring in all the wells in the field. And we'll be able to know that because a lot of this information will become public. And we'll be able to see how much gas was leaked through facility measurements. And we'll also be able to see how much gas was leaked by state measurements, and we'll be able to compare the two.
I was listening to an interview the other night, and Brad Sherman, who's a congressperson out here, he was making the assertion to Southern California Gas, which is the owner of this field, and they are owned by Sempra Energy, that SoCal Gas, because the idea is we want to get the gas out of the ground in a safe way, so it's not just spewing into the atmosphere, but he was making the assertion, and I don't know if this is correct or not, that SoCal was only removing the gas at the rate that they could sell it. The SoCal Gas person was refuting that, saying, no, we're only bringing out the gas at the rate that our infrastructure can contain it. Which one is right, or what do you think of that?
I think that over time, this fiasco has had many different stories. When we look at the beginning of the leak from October 23rd for the first couple weeks and then really for the first month, there was a lot of questions around what the gas company was doing to remove pressure from the field by pumping gas out. And indeed, in California, while we have other natural gas storage fields, during that time, there wasn't a heck of a lot of use that California consumers were demanding. Pretty temperate environment, wasn't really hot, wasn't really too cold. It was really nice for California. But that meant that the gas company didn't really have a lot of places that they necessarily were looking to send it, nor had the state government directed them to do everything they can to get as much gas out of the field as possible. Well, in stepped Governor Brown and the Department of Conservation and the Public Utilities Commission and the Air Resources Board, and they got together. And I think, rightly so, they ordered the gas company to do a lot more than it was doing and to look for all opportunities they could to get as much gas out of that field as possible. And now I think that certainly we have them sending gas out of that storage facility faster than they can sell it and sending it to wherever they can find space.
Okay. The SoCal Gas woman the other night, their spokesperson, was essentially saying that yeah, right now we're getting a little bit of increased demand, so that helps them. But the idea that they were initially not sending it out as fast as they could have, that's pretty damning.
It certainly raises eyebrows about whether the company was doing everything they could from day one to bring the emissions down as fast as possible. That is really, I think, going to be a part of the investigation, the root cause analysis, both in terms of what happened and what happened after the initial leak, to see if there were things that could have been done to reduce the pollution that's escaping from the site.
The people that live in Porter Ranch, and I have some friends, I've seen their posts recently on social media, these nosebleeds, all these various things that are associated with this, and there is this odorant that's introduced into the gas, which I can't find the name for,
Mercaptan.
Mercaptan. Okay, so this is introduced into the gas so that we can smell it, and this is one of the things that is, I guess, making people have the sick symptoms. But my question is, so if that had not been introduced into the gas, and it's unfortunate that it's making all these people so sick, were we going to know? Were we going to know that this well was leaking at the rate that it was leaking? I'm sure at some point they were going to come back around and check, supposedly, the integrity of the well. But without this smell, would we have known?
Well, I think you've sort of hit the nail on the head of an issue that a lot of people haven't really looked at, because there are facilities located around the United States that don't have mercaptan in them. And when you don't sell that gas to, say, residential customers, or you're not located in an area where it's populated, a lot of the facilities, they don't inject that material into them. And so we actually know that there are a lot of leaks throughout the system in the United States where people just are totally unaware because there's no odorant in it, because it's in an unpopulated area. And in this particular one, the mercaptan, which is an irritant in addition to just an odorant, it's the consistent and persistent odors is really quite bothersome and irritating people physiologically. That and the combined effect of carcinogens that are in the air that have been detected, other ozone-forming compounds that may or may not be contributing to local air quality problems. I mean, those are all things that are making people sick. They may not necessarily be giving people cancer today, and there may be actually below the threshold, and indeed the health departments have said that you're not likely to be getting, long-term health effects from this problem. But what I do know is that if I'm living in a community and I'm smelling something where somebody said, oh, I've detected a carcinogen in that air, I'm certainly going to be worried. And that, I know, makes people sick. Persistent worry, the not knowing, and the not knowing about the health of their children, that creates physiological responses in and of itself.
Understood. The pictures that I've seen of the people that have had these nosebleeds, and I don't want to focus on that too much, but it's just, I'm shocked. I mean, I haven't had a nosebleed. I don't even remember when the last time I had a nosebleed was. And when I had one, it certainly didn't look as bad as what I'm seeing. I'm seeing people with handkerchiefs just completely covered with blood. It's shocking. There's also, benzene coming out of the well as well? Mm-hmm. Now that's certainly a carcinogen, isn't it?
That's right. It's a known carcinogen. And, on the nosebleed front, I was talking to a woman, last week who was telling me about her 3-year-old kid. And I have a kid myself, and, her kid had his first nosebleed. And I can't imagine if I was sitting there and I was looking at my 3-year-old and all of a sudden his nose started bleeding and I was smelling something in the air. I mean, that is just atrocious to have to live through that.
It is awful. And these people, they've now moved 2,300 people out of the area.
That's correct.
And I'm certain that many more are going to be moved out. We've got 2 schools shut down, I believe. We've got several lawsuits which have been filed. So I think my main thought about this is just, how do we actually close this well? Because I've seen the diagrams that show the relief well. And in my personal opinion, it looks like a dodgy proposition. I've heard that they say initially, oh, we think we saw the source of the leak at 500 feet. And then I saw another one where I think around mid-December they said, well, we think or maybe it was late December, we think that the source of the leak is like 1,300 feet down. Well, what that tells me is they really don't know where the leak is. And this idea that we're going to drill this relief well, which in all the diagrams I've seen is an S shape, seems very difficult. Do you think that this will be successful, and do you think they will be able to do it in the amount of time that they are quoting?
I think that technology in well drilling operations has grown and improved by leaps and bounds over the last many years. And you can, with a high degree of certainty, hit a well that's 7 inches wide, starting at a well pad that's located, 1,200 feet away. And that's what they're trying to do in this thing. And in fact, they are drilling 2 wells. The second one hasn't started drilling yet, but just in case the first one fails, the second one they think we should be able to do the trick. That doesn't mean, though, that the first one is likely to fail. I think what we're really seeing, though, is the fact that it's taking upwards thus far of about 70 days to get to this point from October 23rd, and we're looking probably at another 70 before they finish it. We're seeing not only a very slow process unfold and an environmental catastrophe that's happening during that time, the gas company is really dealing with a very dangerous situation up there, which is causing them to have to go very, very slow as they go through this process. And so, we have methane being emitted in vast, uncontrolled quantities. It is, in and of itself, an explosive hazard at that site. And I'm surprised we haven't seen other fallouts and other injuries and catastrophes result from this.
When you say that, do you mean that directly resulted to this particular blowout?
I think that when the Air Board flew their airplane over the well site and they detected upwards of 60,000 kilograms of methane per hour coming out of this site, I mean, that is a tremendous hazard for explosions and for flammability and for worker safety. And yeah, I think that this is a very dangerous situation, and drilling another well 1,200 feet away has to be done with the utmost care.
And I'm understanding that the reason that they're drilling it from 1,200 feet away is because they're afraid if they get any closer, that if we get a spark of any type, that ignites the gas in the ground. And listen, I'm not a geologist, but if we've got this tremendous amount of methane coming out of the ground and these other things, which we'll get to in a moment, if it does explode, can it explode up through the earth, or is the explosion simply on the outside? I don't understand.
Well, we've seen actually this facility, and there's a picture of the well there with giant craters located right next to it. This facility has had some well fires in the past, and when you think about what happened in the Iraq oil fields after the Gulf War, how they set those wells on fire.
Yes.
The oil and the gas underground doesn't explode. There's no real oxygen down there. And so it burns at the surface. And so we're not really at risk of this mountain blowing up, but we'd certainly be at risk of seeing a giant fireball in the air and a geyser of fire that would be emitted until they're able to get this relief well under control.
Another thing that I'm hearing about now is that there is this oily mist that they are trying to control. And the mist, I believe, is the brine that they have injected into the hole to try to stop it, and now it's coming up and mixing with the air?
When you think about the field itself as an old depleted oil aquifer, right? And anything that's down in that subsurface has been mixed around with oil and with other sorts of liquids that have been in the subsurface. In this particular one, there's a lot of gas that's coming out and things that have been mixed with that oil for a while. And so the brine and the stuff, the mud that they pumped in there, which by all accounts has been ejected out and deposited all over this site. I mean, with the first pictures of this showed it to be a pretty clean site, and now everything is covered in muck and mud. And when you think about what's coming out and the fact that the gas company themselves have documented that there are hydrocarbons been detected in that, we know what is coming out is not stuff that's suitable to breathe, and now they're erecting these 60-foot tall fences. Certainly, it's an unfolding catastrophe, and it seems like every day there's bad and worse news.
Yes. There's these nets that they're trying to put in place. over the pad, I guess, and the pad is the area immediately around the blowout. These pads, they're supposed to catch that mist before it can flow down the mountain to the public?
Yes, best I can tell, that's the plan.
So it's like a filter, so the air can still pass through it, but it's supposed to hold down this other particulate matter or oily gunk, whatever it is.
That's right. And I know that when we think about what the company's doing, it's easy to see that, okay, the company's going to do this, the company's going to do that. But I also know that the state government has taken a very active role. The Office of Emergency Services has been activated by Governor Brown and his staff to make sure that the state isn't just accepting what the gas company says. And all of these steps are being taken in concert with recommendations from them. And in fact, a lot of the people that are working and evaluating this were some of the same folks from the same national labs that were active on the Deepwater Horizon spill back in the Gulf in 2010.
I saw that. You were quoted in one of the articles that I saw when we were getting back to the Deepwater thing. You were saying that essentially the carbon footprint from this is larger than Deepwater Horizon.
Yeah, when you think about the fact that the amount of carbon dioxide equivalent that's come out is about as much as burning at thus far as 750 million gallons of gasoline. I mean, that does surpass by a mile what the Deepwater put out. However, you look at what that Gulf oil spill was in terms of a tragedy and what it did to the whole Gulf Coast and to the ecosystem there, it's really incomparable to anything else. I mean, that was, say, the Empire State Building. This is the Sears Tower. They're both huge and dramatic and both really harmful for the environment.
When it began on October 23rd, from what I'm reading, the people who lived there said that the gas company didn't really inform them for a full week afterwards. And they were sending people around kind of checking for the odor, but they weren't really letting them know what happened until a week later.
Right. I think that question about the company response really needs to be a part of the investigation into what happened, both to cause the well as what the response was from the company as well as from the state agencies. And I know that a root cause analysis into the emissions is underway, and it would be really tragic if the company was found to be responsible for hiding the ball. We think generally there was some downplaying of the significance of this event from the very beginning. The first sets of emissions estimates showed that this was incomparable to any other emissions that we've seen in the state. And so I certainly think that if the company knew or should have known and decided not to know how big it was and downplayed it, that's a real problem.
Certainly is. Let's talk a little bit about this safety valve that seems to be at the root of the issue. So we've got this well, and it was 8,000 feet deep?
Yeah, about 8,500 feet deep.
Okay, so it had this safety valve in the bottom of it, and then it needed repair. So they take the safety valve out. They then decide that since it is not a critical well, meaning I think that's the term they use because it's not so close to homes or schools, that, hey, you know what? We're in compliance with existing regulations. Let's just skip the safety valve. Am I understanding this correct? Is that what happened?
Well, back in the 1970s, things were a little different then than they are now. Unfortunately, the regulations haven't really been updated since then. So the facility documents do show that there was some equipment that was removed from the well and that it was not replaced. And it's true that this is not designated as a critical well. But there's also a line of inquiry and some engineering documents and really supported evidence based on well operations that say that even if you had a safety valve of that nature, it doesn't necessarily mean that they could have prevented this from happening. This major emission source, you may have had some well blowouts, something of that nature, and you might still have had this type of event because safety valves sometimes can fail, they themselves can leak, they're the source of a lot of inspections, and they need updating and care. And so when we think about what the root cause is, I don't think we can prejudge that the removal of the safety valve is the smoking gun of what went wrong here. I certainly think it is one factor that needs to be considered. Also, I think the facility inspections of the well, have they been doing mechanical integrity testing and pressure testing to the tune of what industry standards say is needed in order to maintain and evaluate the integrity of the well? We know, for example, that there are documents that the facility has filed with the Public Utilities Commission that has said they have noticed a negative integrity trend in wells at this site, which means they know that there's corrosion and problems with wells occurring at Aliso Canyon. Should they have held themselves to a higher standard of care than what basic minimum out-of-date regulations require? Probably so. And I think that that all has to go into the analysis. I don't think we can say just the safety valve is what did it.
I understand. So how do they check the integrity of these wells? What did they do, and how often did they do it? Let's, on a regular basis with these types of wells.
Well, you can look at the records that are online that are available for the public, and you can see that they do meet minimum requirements that are set by the state for checking these wells once per year. You can send a tool down a well and see whether it's leaking or not, and see whether it has noise or temperature variations that would indicate some release of gas out of the well into the surrounding geology. But what those tests can't tell you is if the well wall thickness has been degraded. It can't tell you on a year-over-year basis whether you're decreasing the integrity of the well such that you're getting ready to fail. And so there are other utilities in California and in other places outside of the state that do things such as magnetic flux logs or gamma ray logs. And those things can actually look at the integrity or the thickness of your well to tell you whether you're likely to blow and not whether you have blown.
And is this kind of what you're working on for the EDF? Because I read that part of your job is trying to create some new regulation regarding methane, its use, and how it's stored. Is that right?
Well, we've observed that across the United States, methane, a very potent greenhouse gas, has been escaping from infrastructure from the well all the way to the house. And we've been doing studies that have shown that methane, as it's being emitted in each of these individual areas, is degrading the climate benefit that natural gas presents. And so when you think about natural gas leaking before it gets to the point of use, because it's so potent, it creates a very significant problem for the long-term use of natural gas. And so we're creating opportunities and sponsoring regulations and legislation to try to reduce the amount of methane leaking at all points in the value chain. This particular point at the well in storage facilities is but one of many areas where natural gas or methane can leak out. And certainly for this, we're going to be weighing in and recommending steps that the state can take, the Public Utilities Commission, the Department of Conservation, can take to promote the integrity of the wells, the storage fields themselves, and reduce the amount of methane going to the atmosphere. You
said something huge. You said that the dangers regarding methane somewhat counterweigh the advantages of, because everybody talks about how clean natural gas is, yet we have a situation like this, and then I think everyone can picture over time your infrastructure, whatever it is. Think about the pipes in your home. They have to be replaced periodically. So if we've got infrastructure that is decaying and corroding over time, if we've got methane, and let's say it doesn't have the odorant added into it, it's just escaping into the air. Nobody really knows.
That's right. And in fact, we look at utility reports here in California, and you see utilities that have discovered leaks in their systems, and those leaks, let's say, are not in a populated area, and so they're not what's known as class 1 leaks. The pipes running underneath our streets and in our neighborhoods, some of those pipes are located in a field a little bit far away, transporting gas from point A to point B. And utilities have documented finding leaks in their system, and because they haven't been required to fix them sometimes, they let them leak, and sometimes up to 30, 40 years. And so we think about the accumulation of all those leaks, If we just let 1% of the natural gas that we use leak into the air before it is actually delivered, you can fully undermine the climate benefit of using that natural gas compared to other fuel sources, which is why we need to keep methane leakage to a minimum. If we're going to use natural gas, which is a fossil fuel, I mean literally made from fossils, we need to keep the methane leakage to an absolute minimum in order to make sure that we're not harming the climate at the same time.
There was a cover story in the LA Weekly a week or so ago, and the writer mentioned that, I believe, just here in Southern California, and particularly around Pasadena, that there was a leak like every 1 to 4 miles?
Yeah, that's correct. In fact, we partnered with Google to outfit some Street View cars with sensitive methane detection equipment. And as we had those cars drive through cities in Los Angeles, we could see, using this sensitive equipment, methane leaks coming from the pipes. And it's not unique to California. You look at Boston, you look at Staten Island, you look at places like Chicago or here in Los Angeles, and this methane leakage issue, it's pervasive. And we're working to upgrade utility regulations and utility investment programs to make sure that they don't let these leaks persist and erode the climate benefits of natural gas.
This is a thermal picture through a FLIR, which I believe is forward-looking infrared. Across the top, you see the gas, because you can't see it with our human eyes. If we could run the video, you guys released, the EDF released a video around the 20th of December, and I found a version of it with some narration, which explains, and this thing is gigantic. I know that Margaret played this a couple of weeks ago, but I think it bears repeating. Can we play the video from the EDF on this leak?
New footage released by the Environmental Defense Fund offers the first bird's-eye infrared view of the natural gas leak at the Aliso Canyon storage facility owned by Southern California Gas Company. The leak, which has been going on since October, is invisible to the naked eye. It's disrupting life in nearby parts of Los Angeles and the San Fernando Valley, and pumping 62 million cubic feet of methane into the atmosphere each day. That's bad news for the climate. Methane, the main ingredient in natural gas, has over 80 times the warming power of carbon dioxide over a 20-year time frame. EDF estimates the daily near-term climate damage caused by the Aliso Canyon leak is equal to the emissions of 7 million cars. The video was filmed by a specialist using an infrared camera called a FLIR. Leaks this size are rare, but major leakage across the oil and gas supply chain is not, and it adds up to a big climate problem, not just in California, but across the country. That's why EDF and others believe oil and gas companies should be required to regularly monitor their systems and curb methane leaks. The footage underlines the severity of the methane leakage problem in the oil and gas industries and the risk it poses both to communities and the climate.
I can't imagine you haven't seen that, but if you haven't, it is quite sobering. That is an incredible amount of gas spewing out of the ground. So Tim, I guess we have to wait for SoCal to do what they say they're doing, and we appreciate your efforts in staying on top of this. What does the EDF do going forward? And tell us just a little bit more about what the mission for the EDF is.
I think on this particular leak, it's really threefold. One is we need to continue to raise awareness of this issue because it has been underreported in the national news and really is a volcano of climate pollution happening in Los Angeles and really points to a problem that occurs every single day across the natural gas value chain. The second thing is we're going to need to mitigate the amount of pollution coming out of this thing. We're going to need to make sure that we reduce the climate change gas that's been released, but also really use this as an opportunity to rethink methane in California, in Southern California. We use a lot of this natural gas for peaking power plants that back up intermittent renewables. If we were to reduce the demand for those, we could reduce the need for this type of facility. And I think in the long run, we need to evaluate whether this facility is actually needed to support reliability and gas purposes in California. And finally, we think about the people of Porter Ranch and we think about the public health crisis that's occurring. And we all need to figure out a way to make them whole. It's going to be very very long time before people forget this, and probably many people never will. Being displaced from your house over Thanksgiving and Christmas and New Year's, kids having to go to different schools. I mean, there were 50 kids a day having to visit the school nurse because of nosebleeds and health problems. That's something that's going to last with them for a very long time. And we need to rethink how this community fits into the fabric of living next door to a major natural gas storage facility, and hold this facility to the gold standard of operations, regardless of whether we update the regulations in California or not.
Besides all of the awful physical ailments that have resulted from this, a lot of people these days, their financial future is in their homes. Mm-hmm. Now, their property values, I'm sure, have dropped drastically as well. And I've heard that SoCal says, well, you know, once we get this sorted out, we are going to cap this. But I mean, do you think they will eventually have to shut the field itself down, or is that off the table?
I think in the long run, we're going to need a real analysis to see whether this field is needed and what can be done to reduce the use of natural gas in California, because it indeed is a climate pollutant, even when you burn it, that then, you know, in an economy where we're trying to reduce our greenhouse gas quantities by 80% below 1990 levels, it's really hard to imagine, you know, burning this much natural gas and still fitting within that framework. And as we do that, as we phase that down, or we increase the amount of local generation of biogas, for example, we can reduce the long-term needs of this facility.
Tim, thank you so much for joining us today, and we're going to place links below this video so that people can check out the EDF and all of the work that you do. So thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been the most recent episode of Antidote. It is hard to imagine that something you cannot see with your own eyes is doing so much damage, but it is. Our hearts go out to the people of Porter Ranch and to SoCal Gas and Sempra Energy. We wish you luck, man. You need to fix this thing. My name is Michael Parker. This has been Antidote. Until next week, you, me, every single one of us, we are the antidote.